There's so much money in the system that an NFT just sold for $69 million after we talked about the previous one Bill Lee bought for $6 million. I don't know that he bought it for $6 million, but somebody bought one last week. NFTs seem like a real thing. It's reasonable to trade stuff, but $69 million
I think it's incredible. I mean, I saw the breakdown of like the number of bidders. Here, let me actually just get this data up because I think you guys will find it really incredible.
My thesis on this, or my theory rather, is that there are a bunch of people who have stakes in these crypto assets, and then they all decide to buy up these NFTs to get the market started. And then once it's started, like
Jason, that's
other
honestly,
people do with art, right? That's what people do in the real art world.
You know this, but I've been buying art for a decade plus, and this is exactly how it works in the art market. We go in there, certain people will go and buy. And then what the gallerist says is, oh, did you know that Chamath just bought this piece or such and such a person bought this other piece? And then all of a sudden the price spins up and then they feed into it. I mean, this is where, an enormous amount of money has been made by gallerists over the last 20 or 30 years. Now it just happens in a different medium. So the bidding breakdown, by the way, of this NFT is incredible. 33 active bidders, 91% of the bidders were new to Christie's, 55% came from the Americas, 27% of bidders were from Europe, and 18% were in Asia. The age breakdown is the most interesting. 6% were Gen Z, so 97 to 2012. 58% of bidders were millennials, born between 81 and 96.
Wow.
33% Gen Xers and 3% baby boomers. So this is really like a transitional change in, basically deciding what's valuable. And I don't think this was any different than, when you had this transition from, sort of impressionist in the art world. Like if you moved from the body of work where, these impressionist paintings were just going for high tens, low hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think it peaked around Van Gogh. And then, basically it went from there off of a cliff where you can basically give away impressionist paintings. And everything went to contemporary and, sort of like this postmodern stuff. And that was a decisional change by boomers.
What does giveaway mean to you, Chamath?
Hey, tens of millions.
Exactly. So I think on the NFT stuff and Beeple, Beeple is the artist. There's two things going on, right? So one is on a technology level, NFTs, non-fungible tokens. It's a legitimate technology for creating provenance on a blockchain. If a piece of art basically gets put on a blockchain, you have perfect provenance. But that doesn't mean that all NFTs are valuable. In fact, most of them won't be. It's just a technology. Then you have the other thing that's happening is on an art level, what these sort of prestige galleries and so on, they're saying that Beeple is now a major artist. And the reason someone becomes a major artist is because they usher in or become representative of some new wave of art, like Chamath is saying. You've got Impressionism, you've got Modernism. I mean, the reason why Jackson Pollock sells for $100 million.
No, 300 to 600.
Okay. It's because he represents an important wave in art. And some of those waves fizzle out and they turn into Ponzi schemes and some of them become real. And people are speculating that this digital art will be a major wave. And they're saying that Beeple is the most important artist and they're kind of betting on that. Now, do I think it's going to last? I don't know. I mean, hard to say. Probably.
You said the key thing though. The key feature of NFTs, which I think is amazing, is that you can actually have ownership and provenance written into a blockchain. Now, you take that abstraction, you can apply it to all kinds of surface areas, and it makes a ton of sense. Any kind of other asset would make sense. If you own a car, if you own clothes, if you own watches, if you own wine, what happens if you own a house? Now, all of a sudden, if you can prove ownership over this stuff, not only can you trade it, but you can also borrow against it. And I think that is a really interesting idea where once you financialize all of these physical assets that we own, you do eliminate an enormous amount of inequality in the system because you can actually get real transparent pricing. Like now, could you?
Yeah, blockchains are a ledger, right? They're a perfect ledger system. And so like every type of possession that relies on title should eventually be blockchained. So art's a good example. I helped found a company back in 2017 called Harbor, which was a blockchaining real estate. And it ended up getting acquired. So now
acquired or acquired?
No, it got acquired. We're going to make... Don't worry, Chamath. Don't worry, Chamath. We're going to make money. We're going to make money.
As an LP, I just wanted a clarification.
Yeah, no... We're not going to make like SPAC type money, but we'll make a little bit of money on that deal. So don't worry. But yeah, look, I think we're in the early stages of this type of technology. You're going to see eventually blockchaining of every type of asset where title is important.
David, I think that this is such an amazing idea because, like, if you think of all of the opaque lending markets where people can't get access to reasonable cost of capital and they own assets, you end up in these crazy worlds where, like, if you look at the housing crisis or the great financial crisis, there was like so much crazy lending, but behind that lending was like double, triple mortgages. It's happening right now in the car market. All of that stuff doesn't necessarily need to exist because if you have clear provenance and the ability to price risk, you just get, people can borrow a reasonable amount of money at a reasonable rate and pay it back. And, you can trade assets, you could sell assets. It's a really big deal, I think.
I think if you take a zoom out on the notion of what an NFT represents, it doesn't feel too dissimilar from other, what I would argue is like non-productive assets. Like if you think about where one's capital goes, where an individual puts their capital, the first thing is kind of essentials, right? Things you need like food and medicine and housing and clothing and whatnot. And then you kind of enter into these kind of, kind of discretionary spending for a consumer, nice stuff, nice clothes, luxury goods, things that are basically going to diminish. Then as you think about allocating the leftover capital, you're either going to allocate your leftover capital into investable assets that are either productive or non-productive. A productive asset is something you buy that you expect to return. It produces some value for you as you own it, such as owning a home where you get the value of living in it, or owning a car where you get the utility of driving around in it, or owning a bond which issues a coupon or a stock that's going to generate cash flows at some point in the future, theoretically. The non-productive assets are these assets that are just not designed to do that, but they're a store of value that you expect at some point to realize some return. Because someone else will pay a higher price to you for that non-productive asset. This is like a piece of art or, some piece of gold or something, something that you kind of hold, or, more increasingly, digital assets. And it seems like the explosion in digital assets is, as Jason pointed out at the beginning, like as we've kind of moved to a highly kind of overvalued segment of productive assets, as things, that market is very frothy. It's very difficult to kind of find productive assets that are worth putting capital into. There's continually more interest in non-productive assets across the board because there's excess capital in the system. And it turns out that when that happens, there's enough of a market dynamic that emerges in non-productive assets that gives people a reason to put their capital in and expect to have a return on them in the future. As soon as the market starts shrinking, as soon as you start having effects that are deflationary, money will pour out of that market in general. That's always what happens with the art market and has for hundreds of years. And it's the digital means of kind of realizing that same market transition that Chamath talked about.
My question is, do you get the rights? I guess this is dependent on the terms that are set in the smart contract. But in the case of the Beeple, if I were to buy it for $69 million, do I have the rights to it so that I can print T-shirts and sell $100 T-shirts? Or can I create 10,000 more of these? Can I monetize it? Is what I'm asking.
That's a great question. I don't know, but that's a fabulous question.
By the way, because the alternative, like as you pointed out, the artist and other folks have rights to art, even though the original painting is what's sold. The original master of a Bruce Springsteen song could be sold to a collector. But the rights on that track for reproducing it and making money off it are owned by a publishing house.
So you can own the physical magnetic tape, but not own the rights to exploit it commercially. And over time,
those rights fall away. So if you think about what that NFT represents, it represents that particular chain of electrons, and this is these bits that represent this image. And it's not necessarily. Can people
make 100 more and then sell those?
He could change one pixel, theoretically, or 2 pixels, and he could go print a bunch of stuff and go sell it, right?
Not really, because those images were ones that he had this rhythm of creating like one a day, I think, for a very long period of time.
And he contributed them all into this master, right?
Exactly. So it's a one of one. Another interesting one of one that just happened was these performance artists, or I guess like underground digital artists, bought a Banksy for $125,000. I get thousands and millions confused. Just that's
All
a
right,
joke.
everybody. Well,
That's a
the
douche
hashtag
joke.
you want to use for this episode is hashtag cancel Chamath. Go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah, good luck.
Please.
Good luck. Anyways, these 4 guys bought this Banksy for $125,000. They brought it to a warehouse in Brooklyn. They took a high-res image of it. Okay, so they took a picture of it, and they created a one-of-one NFT, right?
Okay.
Then they created a YouTube video of them burning the original Banksy.
Oof.
So now all you had was the digital manifestation of this physical thing. Wait for it. And then they sold it for $350,000. So they 3x their money. It's the most incredible story. I can find the link and I'll put it in the show notes as well. But it just shows you what's happening. And then I also think last thing on NFTs, I saw that I think it was like Kings of Leon just put out an album, and it's like $50 for a song or something like that. And it comes with like a bunch of interesting content. So it's the beginning of something, guys. I just think that you need sort of like popular content to get this movement going. But it seems to me like this is what people want to do. They want to own digital assets. They want to have provenance. They want to have custodial relationships with it. They want to basically,
but it's just like art and posters, right? Anyone can put the poster up in their room. Anyone can buy a copy for $5, but who owns the original? And owning the original may be visually identical, maybe graphically identical, but it is truly about that notion of that theoretical human mind construct of ownership that creates that distinction. And you just effectively have to count on other human minds believing the same thing in the future for you to be able to reclaim that value, that monetary value, or you're going to take a loss on it. I mean, Chamath, have you ever sold art that you've bought?
You know, I've sold very little. I tend to buy and accumulate with this idea of eventually endowing something with, just because it's like, you know, I think there are 2 ways to buy art. One is speculatively and the other one is to tell a story. I took the second path. And so, you know, it's stuff that means a lot to me. So it's hard for me to part with it, even though it sits in a free port in Delaware. So it's not exactly, you know, out and about. With this idea that at some points people will get to really enjoy it once.
By the way, I mean, one of the things that happens in the art world, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you buy this art and you don't ever, a lot of art doesn't get resold. So everyone kind of buys it under the notion that it's going to be worth more in the future and they can sell it for more. But very few people actually do end up selling it.
No. That's it. So here's
I
great
guess in the trading market, right? But like, I mean, generally, like a lot of collectors end up endowing art or gifting it. And when you gift it, you get an appraisal done and you get a deduction on the appraised value, right? And so
you can definitely do it that way. So one interesting story is that one of the large auction houses has a financial arm, and the most incredible thing is like over like the last 50 years, their cumulative default rate was 30 basis points on their book, like cumulatively, not like a year or a month, but ever.
Nobody defaults.
Well, because they borrow money for the purposes of maybe buying other things or whatever, and then they will trade out of things and trade up to things and trade across things. But it's a very vibrant market of buying and selling. It just happens to be very informal and a little bit closed and very much for insiders. And, you know, another reason that I think that NFTs will change, because will change this, is that it just makes it available to everybody, because you put all art on a very level playing field. And really, at the end of the day, what is art? It's a commentary on society. And I think that having that level of transparency on that kind of stuff is going to be really valuable, because you don't want 1 or 2 people who you fundamentally disagree with as being a tastemaker for a kind of art that you think is fundamentally flawed, right? You'd rather, it's no different than being able to go to 95 different media sites to read the content you want, or, you know, being able to listen to 1,000 different kinds of music. All of it in its totality is a commentary on society. And I think what society says is we want transparency and we want choice. And this is where I think, like, that's why I think NFTs
I think this is a good dovetail